How happy it sounds in here. Hello Otto and Anna. So glad you two could make it for the extra class in biology today.
Hi, Mr. Kivano.
I'd have poor manners if I don't also wish our radio and online listeners a good day. Thank you all for joining us. This is the third program in our series on AS level biology, produced for grade 12 learners and anybody else who is interested in biology. Please get your pen and a notebook ready, as I will again ask you to answer some questions at the end of this lesson.
Yes, sir.
At the end of this program, you should be able to discuss the meaning of the term species in the biological, morphological, ecological, and behavioral contexts. Now, I have a question. Can you remember how to define a species?
Sure. Let me think. A species is a group of organisms with similar features which are able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Fertile offsprings can only be produced when organisms of the same species mate.
Well said, Anna. Scientists are able to distinguish between different types of animals or plants, between dogs and cats, and between roses and geraniums, for instance, using the differences in their appearances. So, Mr. Linnaeus, who was the founder of modern taxonomy, the classification system, described individual species in terms of their morphology, their physical form, and this method is still used to characterize species today. Although today, taxonomists do not only use morphological, but also biological, ecological, and behavioral concepts to define species.
What is the difference between all those terms?
I'm glad you asked, Anna, because we cannot learn something we do not understand. Okay, it is 4 concepts to do with the identification of species: biological, morphological, ecological, and behavioral concepts. We start with the biological species concept. That's the definition most often used of species. The biological and behavioral species concept is the same thing. It defines a species as a population or group of populations whose members can interbreed in nature to produce viable and fertile offspring, but which cannot successfully interbreed with members of other species. Donkeys and horses are a good example. A horse is a horse, and a donkey is, well, a donkey. They are not the same organism. Horses and donkeys are not members of the same species. They are similar enough to be able to mate, but this is how mules are created. And mules are sterile and cannot interbreed. 2 mules cannot have offsprings. This is because the biological species concept states that only organisms that are similar enough to interbreed and produce fertile offspring are considered as belonging to the same species.
Okay, so you mean a donkey and a horse can mate, and their offspring is a mule, but that a mule is then infertile and will not be able to breed?
Yes, that is why the biological or behavioral species concept does not apply to mules.
This makes me wonder about wolves and dogs. They are quite similar too, aren't they? Didn't dogs develop out of wolves, evolutionary or with interbreeding?
What a very clever observation, Otto. Indeed, wolves and dogs are able to interbreed to produce viable hybrids with fertile offspring. Do you think this means they are the same species?
Sure, that's a tough one. But no, How could they be the same species? They can't surely, because you said a horse is a horse and a donkey is a donkey. Well, the same can be said of a wolf. You would look at it and say, that one is a wolf and that one is clearly a dog. So they are not the same species, but they can breed and produce fertile offsprings?
No, they are the same species according to the definition, Anna. But what you have so cleverly identified is a major shortcoming of the biological species concept. The biological species concept in full is identified as see if you can spot the additional last part. A biological species is a group of organisms similar enough that they could interbreed and produce fertile offspring under natural conditions. Natural conditions refer to sexual reproduction, and it does not work for organisms such as bacteria and viruses that produce asexually. Another limitation of the biological concept to define species is that it is also not able to detect whether fossil organisms would have been able to interbreed. Fossils are the remains of animals that used to exist but are no longer around. These remains were left on Earth. Biologists therefore have to rely on structure and, in some cases, biochemical similarities to classify fossils and most microorganisms. The fossils are no longer alive, so the bio or live observation is not possible.
That makes absolute sense.
Okay, so we can move on to the next structure that is used for identification, and that is the morphological species concept. You do know who I mean when I refer to Morph, right? The TV character?
Oh, yes. He's a blue kind of clay figure and he changes shape all the time.
Oh, yes. Now I remember too.
Now then, morphology in biology is the study of the outward appearance, the size, the shape, and structure of animals, plants, and microorganisms. It also includes the relationships between the parts that make up these organisms. The morphological species concept groups organisms according to their structural and biochemical similarities. Nowadays, biologists use the morphological species concept more than any other to differentiate between species in nature, even though its potential to confirm interbreeding is limited.
Interesting.
And the ecological species concept?
The ecological species concept focuses on a group's common ecological role, which is the set of environmental conditions and resources that the group uses.
Okay. It's like organisms that live together and use the same resources?
Oh, yes, basically. The ecological concept is based on the idea that ecological, that's natural environmental, and evolutionary or developmental processes divide resources in such a way that individuals can most efficiently adapt to use those resources as a group. All members of a species then in each uniquely adapted to use a particular set of environmental conditions. A relatable example I can use can be a cow and a goat. They can both occupy the same habitat but divide the available resources within the environment. A cow typically feeds on low-growing vegetation, such as grass. A cow is a grazer, whilst the goat typically feeds on high-growing vegetation, such as leaves and branches. A goat is a browser.
And this leaves us just with the behavioral species concept.
That's right, Otto. The behavioral concept of species identification has to do with the fact that individuals within a species respond to stimuli. their environment, and other organisms in species-specific ways. We say intraspecific stimuli refers to stimuli within the organisms, and interspecific stimuli are the responses to stimuli of organisms upon one another. The response to stimulus, be it an external or internal cue, or a combination of cues, brings about a change in the activity of an organism, regardless of the global location of the species. And that, my dear learners, bring us to the end of lesson 3.
But can you please summarize it for us again?
Of course I will. And I will also give you 2 questions afterwards to test your understanding of the lesson. So we have learned today that a species is the smallest group of organisms into which biologists classify living organisms. A biological species is a group of organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring under natural conditions. This is probably the most widely accepted definition of a species. The morphological species concept groups organisms according to general structural and biochemical similarities. This is probably the most practical definition for use in the field of science. And the ecological species concept groups organisms together if they share a unique set of adaptations to a particular set of environmental conditions. Anna, Otto, learners, you can now answer the following questions in your notebook. Give a definition for the term species with reference to the biological, morphological, and ecological concepts. Listeners, learners, please remember, NAMCOL has many more radio lessons that can help you brush up on exciting school topics in your grade. Check out our website www.youtube.com/c/NAMCOL-Edu1. We hope you have enjoyed the lesson and have taken notes to study. Thanks for tuning in. Join us again soon.
This lesson is produced by NAMCOL with funding from the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture.